Welcome to the Practice Podcast, a show created by lawyers to help lawyers in life and business without all the complicated lawyer language. Let's welcome Bast Amron founders and your hosts, Jeff Bast and Brett Amron.
Welcome to a special edition of the Practice Podcast. This episode is a recording of a panel discussion from Bast Amron's 5th Annual Business Advantage Forum, which took place on January 12th, 2023. The forum is a learning event we host and underwrite each year with all proceeds donated to a charitable organization. This year, our theme was rejuvenation, and this panel was called Running a Business with Morals. Is This the New Normal? If you enjoy this episode, we will be releasing more recordings from the forum on this podcast, and please join us for next year's forum in 2024. You can find more information and recordings from prior years on our website at bastamron.com.
So our next panel is called Running a Business with Morals. Is this the new normal? So traditionally, as you know, business has been driven by a singular purpose, and that is profit. But now, increasingly, stakeholders are demanding more. They want businesses with a conscience, and that's all stakeholders, employees, and we're going to talk about it. And we as business owners have set forth values, and we've made a commitment to those values. And now the values are just growing and they're becoming increasingly more common. ESG and DEI, and there's a whole host of CSR, a whole host of acronyms. And I think we see it most in public companies, but it's now permeating private companies. Actually, we heard it a little bit in the prior panel. So we have this esteemed panel of experts that is going to discuss this topic. And I invite you all to, if you have a question, please raise your hands. We'd like to have this be an engaging conversation. We want to have a conversation. It's a super dense and exciting topic, and I have this amazing panel. So here we go. Let me introduce them. To my left, and then going leftward. No, I'm just kidding. Jamie already made that joke. Zamira Zapata Valdés is the Vice President and Associate General Counsel for Mergers and Acquisitions in the Americas at Diageo. And for those of you who don't know, I don't know where you've been, but Diageo sells over 200 beverage brands in 180 countries, including Johnny Walker, Crown Royal, Smirnoff, Kettle One, Captain Morgan's, Bailey's, Don Julio, Guinness. I mean, the list goes on. Zamira is responsible for deal execution for all global business development activity across North America, Latin America, and the Caribbean. And before joining Diageo in 2011, she was the legal corporate director in Genoma Lab, which is a leading public pharmaceutical and personal care products company in Mexico. She has been featured in a number of magazines, including Modern Counsel, which I'm a huge fan of, and Abogado Corporativo, and has been considered for the last 4 years as one of the 100 most powerful women in business by Mexico CNN Grupo Expansion magazine. So welcome, Zamira. I'm going to bounce around and get Carlotta Roos. Carlotta is the Assistant General Counsel for Royal Caribbean Group, which is, you may have heard of them, one of the world's leading cruise companies. They own Royal Caribbean International, Celebrity Cruises, and Silversea Cruises. They operate 64 ships and employ over 80,000 individuals. And I just want you to appreciate that number because in her role, Carlotta oversees all employment-related legal matters, 80,000 employees. She participates in ESG initiatives. She serves on the company's Diversity and Equity and Inclusion Council. And before joining Royal Caribbean, she practiced law. Carlotta practiced law at Morgan, Lewis & Bockius, representing employers from around the world in employment-related litigation and counseling matters. And in the center, Marcia Narine Weldon. She is a law professor and the director of the Transactional Skills Program at the University of Miami School of Law. She's also the general counsel of a startup company. And she's also the co-chair of the governance committee of the Women's Fund of Miami-Dade. And she's also the CEO of Illuminating Wisdom, which is an executive coaching, business strategy, and training firm. She is certified or trained in, this part I gotta read,
You have to go up just please.
I'm going. Neuro-linguistic programming.
Sorry, I'm trying to stop it.
Dr. Amon's Brain Health, the Happy for No Reason method, mindfulness instruction, emotional freedom technique, breathwork, hypnotherapy, DISC, Hogan, and Clifton Strengths behavioral assessments. And in her former life, she served as the Deputy General Counsel and Vice President of Ryder, where she oversaw the company's global compliance, business ethics, privacy, government relations, environmental compliance, ESG, labor, a whole bunch of stuff. So, welcome to this incredible panel. I don't know what I'm doing with this. Okay, so before we get started, I threw out a bunch of acronyms: DEI, CSR, ESG, SDG. Let's start with ESG. Zamira, you want to tell everyone what's ESG? I don't want this panel to just be about ESG, but it's obviously a very common phrasing that we're hearing.
No.
What does it mean?
Thanks, Jeff, for the invite and for saying that we're experts, but I guess it's more of a conversation, no? Because we're all on this journey, no? And you were saying that some companies are ahead than others, but I guess it's a trend that nobody can escape now, no? So ESG is the acronym, no? I guess most of you have heard of, which means environmental, social, and governance. Basically, what has happened or what we have been seeing during the last years is a trend where investors are also valuing where they are putting their money, no? The companies, the businesses, depending on how companies are performing on these areas, no? I guess, as you say, the public ones were or have been forced more into that direction, but I think now is something that, no one can say it's not important, no? Especially because what it implies, no? Everybody wants to do business, complying with certain environmental levels, with some social responsibility guidelines, and also in terms of governance, that they're policing themselves and doing things according to the rules and to law, no? So I guess in the case of Diageo, for example, and I'm here to share a little bit of that journey. I guess in 2015, we set up like a very ambitious plan in terms of just the environmental piece, at that stage. And I guess we were also trying to do some baby steps in terms of diversity and inclusion, because when I say baby steps, I guess it's so broad, as they have been discussing in the last panel, that even though every day you can incorporate and do more stuff in all of these areas, no? So in terms of supply, we launched and we decided that we were gonna do a huge commitment, because in order to have a sustainable business for the future, we needed to invest in having whole chain of supply built into that, no? In order not to affect people, our resources, and the planet, no? And of course, that when we reached 2020, I guess we review back what we have been doing on that area, and of course, we have made some progress, but not the progress that we would want, no? And that's why, for example, you could see that in the US, in Lebanon, Kentucky, we launched a carbon-free plant, and then we started doing some other investments in Canada, but still there's a lot of work to do, no? So we launched this strategy for 2030, where we want to have a very clear commitment, not only on the environmental piece, but also on the social and the governance pillars.
Great. So I think the environmental piece is kind of obvious to most people, but what's the S, the social? What does that mean, Marcia? You want?
Sure, so the S is the social, and that counts for, I think, what's the most difficult part of ESG right now, right? So this is the labor issues, the human rights issues, the land grab issues, the how you deal with your suppliers. When you look at the stakeholder versus shareholder maximization part, the S is the part we're thinking about, right? The diversity, equity, and inclusion, how you deal with indigenous people. So it's the stuff that's permeating everything. And although I don't think we're going to talk a lot about the G today, but there's a lot of overlap with the S and the G. So the S will include bribery and corruption, because bribery and corruption often leads to human rights issues. The G also has bribery and corruption in there. How you political action committees, the diversity, equity, inclusion is also on the G side. You're looking at a NASDAQ issue, you're looking at California, which did all these kinds of things to try to diversify boards. So there's a lot of overlap with the S and the G, and the E, which used to be kind of its a niche area, goes into all of the areas. How do boards look at, from their governance perspective, how are they looking at things like climate change? What's the definition of materiality? Are you looking at double materiality? So on all of these different areas, it's hard to talk about one without the other because they all interconnect.
Right. And so the G, just for clarification for the audience, the G is governance.
This is governance.
The board.
So who's on your board? How are you recruiting for your board? Again, bribery and corruption can come in there. One of the bigger issues you're seeing in terms of staggered boards, what say shareholders have, transparency, pay equity, all those kinds of things go in. But pay equity also goes into the S. So that's why I say that they're interrelated.
But also the diversity of the board, gender, age.
Right.
And tax strategy, no? I think
Please.
that has also been a key element of governance, no? To see that businesses that do have operations in multi jurisdictions are complying with all these tax regimes in a compliant way, no? Because I guess that has been also on the news, no?
Right. Yeah. So on that topic,
Tax avoidance, not tax
Exactly.
evasion.
is on that topic exactly. Yeah.
One is legal, one is not.
Let's talk limitation. Right. Do these terms or what we're talking about? Does it matter where you're practicing? Where what type of business you are geographically? What type of business? What
Of
sector?
course.
Carla?
Absolutely. I mean, let's just start with environmental, right? The concerns for a firm. Let's get a big water dispenser as opposed to a water bottle versus emissions from cruise ships, 64, right? I mean, that's a huge difference there. So the industry matters. Your population of employees, which is the most important thing, frankly, in my role, matters. And even within my role, you have differences. So it's not just companies or industries. I think it's the different populations within your company or industries as well. So there's every company has a personality,
Right.
which will dictate what ESG means to them.
Right. Okay. And I see why environmental matters to a cruise line. I think that's pretty obvious. But does it matter to the small businesses that are represented here?
Perhaps more so, right? I mean, I've got a lot of support. We have funds for ESG, right? We have boards. We have everything. We have a sustainability plan. I would say that the smaller employers or companies perhaps have to dedicate even more attention to these things because it's certainly on Royal Caribbean's radar, but it needs to be on even the smaller companies' radar.
I can add something on top.
Okay, please.
Part of that reason is because almost every company is part of some other company's supply chain or value chain. So to the extent that you're going to be dealing with some kind of disclosure, right? So when I was in-house, I had to sit there and look all over the world because one of our we help manage other companies' supply chains, right? So they had to do their own disclosures about emissions, about how much water we were using, how much fuel we were using on our trucks, etc. So by definition, we had to ask that we had to deal with some of our truckers. And so up and down, no matter where you are, and I'll talk a little bit about it later in terms of the European Union and other regimes that have a lot of disclosure regimes, so they're expecting you to be either upstream or downstream. And so sometimes smaller companies which aren't used to this, they have the disclosure fatigue, right? Because they don't know why they're disclosing it. They don't have the resources, they don't have the data and infrastructure to get that information. But you're finding increasingly you can't, whoever your water supplier is or whoever your supplier of temporary labor, all of those are people that have the ability to destroy your company and your brand. So it's particularly important to see what they're doing as well.
Great point. So I said I didn't want to just talk exclusively about ESG, and it seems like that's what we're doing. So I want to zoom out a little bit. We named the topic running a business with morals. Is this the right way to word? Are we talking about morals? Marcia, I know you had some thoughts about
I think
this.
it depends on what you call morals, right? So, is morals the same thing as ethics? Is it what you were taught externally and then becomes your internal code? But then we also have situational ethics, right? If you're watching the news and you see a poor mother in war-torn Ukraine stealing a loaf of bread to feed her family, like, all right, we're not supposed to steal, but that's okay. Then what about companies, right? The more you might have a company code, your code of ethics that says don't lie, don't cheat, don't steal, always follow the law. What if you live in a state called Fantasyland? You have a governor who said if you say these certain things or do these certain kind of training, it could be a problem. But that's against the mission statement of how you choose to treat your employees. Is it moral and ethical to follow what the governor's law is? Do you risk potential damage to your company, shareholder issues? What's the right thing? If you're a tobacco company, other than religious ceremonies, which there are some which use tobacco, and there's a use for it, there's really no health benefits at all to tobacco. But what if that company also gives 20% of its profits to build schools and wells and potable water? Does that make it more moral or ethical? So I think it really is, what are the company's values? And a lot of consumers say they really care about the morals of the company. I'm not convinced, to be perfectly honest. I think people tend to go on convenience, quality, and price. But a lot more employees, especially the younger generation, they really want to work for a company that has, I see it with my students. They've got student loan debt, so they're going to work for whoever pays them, let's be honest. But what they say, right, is that they really care about the values of the company and the values of the firm. And so the values, I think, it's really more of a personal thing, but it's what do you stand for? What are you willing to do? And for these companies, they're talking about we care about ESG, now they're going into recession with headwinds, and troubles coming up, are they going to stick to their, net zero carbon, net zero 50, net zero 30? Are they going to stick to that? Or are they going to say, well, if we do that, we might have to lay off some people? Those are the questions that it's hard to say something moral or ethical, because it really goes to what does the company stand for, and are they going to really stand for what they say they stand for?
Right. And by the way, for your students that are going to go chase the money, they might go there, but they're not going to stay there.
I tell them that all the time. But not people in this room, I mean other folks.
We heard that from the prior panel. So we're really talking about values, right? More so than morals. So how does a business, and the prior panel touched on this a little bit, but how does a business decide what values are most important to them?
As you say, sometimes it's hard to define, but I guess it depends on what journey you are in your business, on the development of your business. I guess you would say that sometimes, when there's this no framework or this list of values, sometimes maybe the most senior leadership, can start working around it. I guess the case, and just to make a comparison, the prior company that I worked for, honestly, a Mexican public company, and even though it has its, kind of framework, it didn't have such a clear one-pager as we do in Diageo, where we have set up our performance and vision, which basically is a one-pager that everybody in the company can read, where we say what we want to achieve, how we want to achieve it, and why. And basically there's a purpose there, there's how we will do it, and of course it incorporates the values, how we operate. So for us it's very clear that we are passionate about our customers and consumers, that there's freedom to succeed, that we're proud of what we do, that we value each other, and that we're the best, to inspire everybody to be the best. So of course you can say that there's an interpretation on how you can live those values, but I guess for me the relevance of how I see this in this business versus others is the consistency. Sometimes it's not something that has to be imposed, and of course you will see a lot of rotation with people that maybe may not share some of the values, of they might not like the way you operate, but in certain ways it's a great reference because everybody's clear about what's the general expectation, and I guess being very visible about those has made a whole difference in terms of the environment internally as a company, but also with our suppliers and partners in all what we do.
So developing them, but also communicating them and living them. I guess we heard it, putting them on the wall too, but stating them and following them.
Yeah, in a way accountability, but also in another way, it also has been used as a tool of engaging and inspiring people, because if they tell you like you have the freedom to succeed, sometimes it unlocks a lot of barriers, that it's okay, as long as you're doing it following the law, you can go and try bring creative ideas, think about this, think about that. So it's kind of a framework or values that you can feel across the whole company.
Is it really that important? Is it important to have values and stated values? I mean, we heard a little bit that it's a recruiting tool, maybe, but
it's not important.
No. What are the benefits?
There's nothing more important than a company. Let me just start there. Jokes aside, but I want to go back to value versus morals first for 1 second, because it really does go to how you define it, right? And the phrase tobacco company upsets me and many for so many reasons, right? Sometimes it's not what you do, it's how you do it. All right, there's going to be a tobacco company out there. So let's see how that tobacco company is run. Let's see how they treat their employees. All those things go into the word moral and values. So just wanted to add that in there. And what was your question?
Why are having values? Why is it important?
Okay, well, you can start. Some people start with money. I'm going to end with money. Okay. The investors can come last. They're still important, but they can come last, right? You can't run a business without your people, okay? You're not going to keep people if you don't do the right thing. It's as simple as that phrase, right? We all heard it as kids, do the right thing. And eventually, and there's stats all over the place, that people will not work somewhere where they feel like they're doing the wrong thing. They'll stay there, maybe they'll earn that check, maybe they'll pay off those school loans, but people aren't going to stay. You will not be able to sustain your workforce if they feel like they are doing the wrong thing for the most part. So that's one reason it's important. And then I would go, you can trickle up to the success of the business, right? Vendors won't want to work with you, going back to the multitude of business partners. And then you can go back to the investors. If you're going to keep employees happy, be more productive business-wise, and then keep your investors happy, as opposed to the opposite, which sometimes people start with that investor.
Right. I think the traditional notion here, this in the restaurant business, the customer always first, but I think we've now shifted to the employee first. If you take care of your employees, they'll take care of the customers. So,
and they'll take care of you. They'll take care of the company. Our employees are the ones who make us, the company, look best. They are by far the key to success.
Right. So, I mean, we talk about these concepts of ESG and morals and all these other values, and they tend to be outward facing, but really it's inward facing. I mean, outward facing meaning your supply chain, the way the boats are, where you're...
From the chair I sit in every day, that's my opinion. But there's very different pieces of the puzzle. There are parts of my organization that are very focused on the environmental, right? Of course, that's important to me as a person, but my day-to-day, it's the people, right? So even within an organization, you might focus on things, prioritize differently.
Right. Marcia, did you want to add anything on those? Like, what are the primary drivers here? I mean, we talked about the investors and other stakeholders, but what is driving this initiative, if you will?
I think it's dependent. You say investors, but investors can be a lot of different. 30 years ago, 90% of investors were retail investors. Now, 90% are institutional investors. And then even with those institutional investors, what kind of investors are they? Are they investors dealing with our pension funds? Are there teachers unions? Is it the University of Miami? Is it Larry Fink of BlackRock? It could be anybody, right? And what's important to them? Are you talking about impact investors, sovereign wealth funds? So what's important, and I say important, I mean material, but for those in law school, you might remember years ago, the materiality standard, right? What's the reasonable investor think is important in the mix of information to make an investing decision? Well, if I'm an impact investor, it's a very different thing. If I'm a socially responsible investor. So you have companies that are, especially public companies that are thinking about, what am I going to tell the street this quarter? That short-termism can be particularly dangerous. And as we go into these headwinds, now you've got all these layoffs happening. What's going to happen when the economy picks back up again? Who's going to be coming back to you? And are you laying off because you really have to lay off, or are you laying off because the profits per partner are a little bit less? Right? Is it, existential threat to your company? So these are the kinds of things when I look at what some of the drivers are. I'm also looking at the various disclosure regimes, right? The EU came into effect last week, I guess, the non-financial disclosure requirements, where they are looking at human rights issues, business ethics issues, environmental issues. They're looking at double materiality. So yes, how does climate change affect you as a business? And then how do you affect climate change? Right? So if you are a EU company of a certain amount of turnover and you've got people in your supply chain, your value chain, you're going to be asking a lot of these questions. And the EU has been far ahead of this. And then I think the other big driver is the threat of legislation. Companies just want to know what I have to comply with. Just tell me what it is. I may not like it, as long as I know what it is and it's going to be set in stone. We're not going to have 17 years of comment period and then they're going to wait for the new administration to come in. It's all going to be done. So you find companies saying, we'll just do our own public-private partnership, or we'll just do our own industry initiative. You don't need to regulate us, Washington. We'll just do our own things, set our own standards, and everybody's happy. And then the government says, great, because I actually need your money to run for office. I need your PAC money, so if I don't have to piss you guys off, it'll be fine. So there's so many different drivers as to why companies choose to do what they're doing. And it's particularly difficult if you're a multinational company. Don't have to worry about what Australia thinks and what the UK thinks and what the US might do. So it's best to focus on those values, right? That regardless of what the legislation is, we're going to go above and beyond what the law requires because we want happy employees, because happy employees make happy customers, happy vendors get our products to us on time. Those are the kinds of things that companies should be thinking about from a long-term perspective. And I think a lot of times, sometimes to do the right and the moral thing means you have to look long-term and not just think about the short-term profitability or loss of profits.
I see regulations and laws as the bare minimum. Mm-hmm. That's what they are. They're clarity. So when someone calls me and says, can I do this? I can give them an answer, but that's not where ESG starts for a company that's dedicated.
So the can I do this, is that sometimes really should I do this? I mean, is that your answer sometimes?
It can be both. Listen, I'm practical. I've become practical over the years. I also, I do think that companies have to maintain profitability. I do think layoffs are necessary sometimes, and you have to ask why they're necessary. they're necessary to continue to run a business efficiently and profitable, with a profit margin that's going to sustain the business long term. So that's where I go back to, it's how you do things. So yes, I think that the can versus the should, they're both important for different reasons. And the should, there might be a point where there's something that you should do on a personal level, but for business reasons you perhaps shouldn't do. You give one employee X, Y, and Z because they're having a hard time at home. Let's use that example, right? But I have 80,000 employees. If I can't do that for 80,000 employees, perhaps I can find a non-monetary solution for them. So it's very complicated, very situational, but I think the can question goes to the laws, and the laws are the bare minimum, and everything that comes after that says a lot about the company.
Right. So to me, this just makes so much sense. Who wants to run a business that's not sustainable? It just doesn't make sense to me. So we all established that this is important. Values and ESG, all these things are important. How do we take these concepts from an ideal to a strategy? I think everybody in this room, I would think, wants to work at a place that has values and is putting, what's right first. So how do we do that? How do we implement that in business?
You're raising a great question, no? Because I guess when you are so focused on the day-to-day and the operation of just delivering your role profile or what you were hired for, of course, doesn't give you the chance to widen your visibility and start thinking of precisely that, the medium and the long term. So I guess where you have seen a difference is in those businesses that have sometimes taken the time to stop and think and basically create a plan that has traceable objectives in the middle and long term in order to start seeing that progress. So I guess it's about creating those plans, communicating those plans, and embedding those so everybody has visibility and clear direction of where do you want to take the company, in those areas. So, for example, going a little bit back on this 2030 society plan, which, as I said, started an environmental plan in 2015, and in 2020 we changed it into a society strategy for the next 10 years that includes the environmental, the social, and the governance. We have been very vocal, and it's not about just launching it, it's about, as you say, monitoring, sharing the progress, building up, and of course there might be some situations, as we have been mentioning, the recession that can make you stop or delay some of those actions, but in certain way, if you need to start building up those plans, to bring those ideas into actions. Otherwise, it can be the idea of 2 or 3 individuals, and the idea is in order to move the whole organization, in order to impact it, because that's the other challenge, If you just work internally, you won't be able to expand at least on those efforts. So in order to try to expand a little bit and go externally, you also need to, to embed your stakeholders, your partners, and while they might not be able to provide or do the same level that you're expecting, in a certain way, it's generating a contribution to those plans. It's about impacting,
So you mean like communicating it to your vendors or suppliers or customers?
Yes.
Is that the idea?
Totally. I'm bringing them on board. I think you have to look at the whole circle,
Right, internally and externally. And so how do you avoid, it sounds like you were alluding to this, the risk of that you're just paying lip service, or we hear the term greenwashing out there. Is there a way to avoid that?
I think it's, there's not just greenwashing, and greenwashing is basically when you're saying you're more green than you are. So you see governments right now going after kind of green bonds and ESG funds, which really aren't ESG funds at all, but it's trying to say that there's paint washing, where you have a company that puts everything out for Breast Cancer Awareness Month, but they treat their women employees terribly. There's a concept of woke washing. Right after George Floyd came out, everybody's like, power to Black people, but treat Black people terribly in a company and have no real diversity. And so what you're seeing now is that it's so easy because of the spread of social media to call a company out, rightly or wrongly, because everything is so instant. Sometimes people are canceling companies on any kind of actual data. just because some influencer put a tweet out there and things spread like wildfire. But there is that danger of companies trying to do, quote, what they think is the right thing without actually looking in the mirror first and say, all right, before we talk about this, how do we play our suppliers, right? Are we operating in a country where it's the race to the bottom, where a country does not enforce its environmental or its labor or other kinds of rules, and it's the cheapest place to operate? But if we operated here, everything would cost 3 times as much. All of those are things that companies have to think about before they put out public statements of what they stand and believe in, because it's so easy now for companies to be called out publicly, quickly, and immediately. And sometimes that damage can take a bit of time to bounce back from.
So, on that point, do you have to sacrifice? Are we expected to just sacrifice profits for these concepts? To operate in the place that's more expensive, or what's the expectation?
I think you're going to increase profits if it's done right. Okay, so the strategy going to impact that you mentioned, it starts with buy-in from the top, funding, so that you can hire the right people to set meaningful benchmarks, and accountability. What happens the following year if those benchmarks aren't made? Going back to reasonableness, right? We have a net zero initiative for 2050. Right? That doesn't sound exciting. It doesn't sound impressive. It's like 2023. Okay, 2050. Thanks, Royal. That's really great. But the size of our operation and the nature of our operation, that is a huge commitment. And if we don't meet it, there are huge consequences. So, I would say profitability doesn't have to be sacrificed. I think we will be more profitable if people look up to us. And I think this is all part of it. I don't see losing profit over ESG.
For you guys, you're customer facing, so do customers care about this kind of stuff? I would hope so.
Listen to what I said about a tobacco company, right? I have such negative feelings about that. And that's because of what it does to people and other things like that. Now think about cruising. If the environment is very important to you, which I know it is, if the environment is very important to you, there's a stigma surrounding companies that, put a bigger hurdle up for us. And cruise ships do, right? And so I think you're more likely to cruise with me on the friends and family discount. I think you're more likely to cruise with me if you think Royal Caribbean's responsible. So, I think this is all going toward doing good and making more money, frankly.
But it's important to, there's this whole thing called the CSR halo effect, where people say, okay, if Royal Caribbean's great, I'm not going to use your company name.
Can you just tell everyone what CSR?
So corporate social responsibility, right? And you have the halo, kind of like the angel's halo, with the thought of people will say, if that company is great with the environment, then they treat their employees fantastically too. Completely not true, right? Or you can literally say, fair trade. It's completely not true.
It might not be true.
I said this is not that people wish to see other people didn't come here because or that they'll say if you tell people fair trade coffee has no calories, like oh my gosh, because they hear coffee doesn't have any calories anyway, whether it's fair trade or not, right? Unless you put all the stuff in it like we do in mine, it's a lot of calories, right? But just putting the label on it, people say, oh, that's great. I want to be a part of that, and companies know that. And companies again also know that people are fickle, right? And there's this hashtag activism that everybody's upset about one thing for one day, and then there's like a new outrage that we're upset about that, and then we forget. And many companies that I have worked with are well aware of this, and they know at some point people are going to still eat these cookies because these are the cookies that little Johnny likes. And even if we're involved in some massive child slavery scandal, right? Or if we're Nestle and we're in the Supreme Court about child human rights labor, about what happens with who's picking the cocoa beans and child slaves in Mali, people are still going to eat the Nestle food because it's over there, right? And so when you look at morality, sometimes we have to look at ourselves. Like this company is doing a terrible thing, but right, the chocolate's already been picked, it's already the chocolate thing, somebody already made it, I might as well eat it. Right, and so companies know that too.
Chocolate's good.
Yeah. Chocolate's good. Just want to know how you got that chocolate though.
Yeah,
sometimes you may not want to know.
Your point about
I'm not saying Nestle is involved in child slavery.
Right. Carlotta, to your point about the 2050 goal, I assume that also the company sets benchmarks that you're not going to just wake up in 2049 and go, geez, guys, we got 1 year.
No, there are meaningful benchmarks and we have stakeholders to report to.
Right.
And so once you put that out there, you're accountable.
Right.
So no, I mean, we're doing things today. There's reductions already. On the environment side, a company that has so much emission, they have to take it seriously, and that's not waking up. What is that, 27? Yeah, thank you. It's not waking up 20 plus years from now and saying, oh, we're there. No, every single year and probably every single month, there are benchmarks on the important initiatives for companies this size.
Right. And I suppose, to me as a leader, being accountable means reporting it even when I fail. I was thinking that, one of the ways we in our firm try to say that we're, not try to say it, but one of the things we communicate about being environmental is like reduction of paper. We try to reduce paper. And I think we've done a good job of it, but we never really measure it. It occurred to me in, having this conversation that we should measure how many pages that we have saved with electronic binders as opposed to, I'm covering my iPad here, my paper iPad. Electronic binders.
I have no paper or electronics, just for the record.
I didn't want to have a laptop. No, but does this fall on the leaders? I mean, is this an issue that it really, does it start from the top? Is there a linear way to do this? I don't know. Anyone have thoughts on that?
What gets measured gets treasured, right? And so some people do things because it's the right thing to do. Many people have to get paid to do the right thing. I think if you have, there's a company in this room, I don't want to say the name of the company unless they want to reveal it, but it's something I think a lot of companies should do. They have ESG metrics in their benchmarks for their bonuses for their executives. I think if you have, and I've seen some other companies that say, well, we have a diversity measure in our people thing. How much is it worth? 2.5%. I said, really? Right, so basically, somebody can do anything if it says 2.5%. That doesn't really mean anything. Is it a meaningful metric and you really hold people accountable? Fire early and often. If your the person that brings in $2 million a year does something wrong, you fire that person. And fire people often so that people realize they can get fired. That's what shows people that you're really sincere about the culture. When you practice what you preach and don't just say things that, bring back some clawbacks of bonuses for people that do the right, and then promote people who do the right thing. And again, it's not always money. I know my old company, if some person, we used to have a thing for safety, and they would bring the drivers, they'd fly them and their family into town to Miami, and they'd send them on a cruise, actually. They'd send them on the cruise. But they would have, all the employees in the company would know about them, and they would do a film for their customers and their coworkers. And you'd see these family members just crying because the CEO of the company is saying, this guy is amazing. That was much more important than the cruise, because it's just a recognition that this guy did the right thing. This guy pulled over when it was too dangerous to drive, and that's the kind of thing we want. Sometimes, though, like you said, those non-monetary things, that's more important.
I'm tagging on to this. Let me tell you.
That's the thing that people care about.
I'm tagging on because you just made me think of something that I didn't even plan to share today. But our crew members, we give lots of little rewards for, I say, getting caught doing good things, with lots of little things on board. And do you know what these crew members want the most? A picture with the captain. They want to send it home to their families and have their mother or grandmother or daughter or son whom they've left to work for 8 months at a time and send the best money back, because they can get more money on a cruise ship than they can in their home environment. And they just want to see, look, I'm with the captain. And that is, if you gave them a list of things, half hour extra of internet and the picture with the captain, the latter coming first. A picture with the captain. It goes to those intangibles sometimes.
I love that. So I guess we're getting close to the time, but can we just as a sort of a wrap or the beginning of the wrap, will running a business with values/morals, however we're defining it, give us an advantage? And what's your advice for those at home who aren't running public companies and involved in massive scale?
So, speaking a little bit on what has been discussed, and as you say, like companies with morals, I guess it has also been mentioned that companies have people, and without those people, of course, you cannot run a company, no? And of course, it's important that those people act in accordance with the morals or the values and doing the right thing, no? So I think that's why it's very important that those values are embedded across the whole business on the one hand. In the other hand, my other thought is about reputation, no? You might damage the reputation, or any employee can damage the reputation of the company, if they do something that is not right, no? And not to say that they're committing a crime, but there may be some cases where they have done some things acting in the roles, and of course has an impact on the reputation of your brands or your company. And I guess when you say, in terms of, for me, it's, yes, right now, financial performance is really important for investors, but I guess right now, one of the most valuable pieces is reputation. Because if you lose it, you're done, no? And I guess we have also seen through the last years, companies that have made the wrong choices and has cost them a huge impact in reputation. And once reputation is hit, in order to rebuild it and rebuild trust, is something really harsh, no? So for me, when you were saying about that, I guess that's something that might not be economically measurable, but the fact that doing the right thing is connected with the reputation, what you have created. And of course, maybe there's companies who are very recently created, or of course there's more than have a whole lot of history. But I guess reputation is something in this world that right now, in the current moment, that is crucial, no? In order to be able to continue growing and have a sustainable.
So one of the things I agree with everything you said, but one of the things you mentioned is this idea of doing the right thing. And, I just wonder, you can't always do the right thing every time. And so, one thing right may be another thing wrong. If I drive an electric car, but the battery is made in an unsustainable manner, maybe that's not the right thing. How do we figure this out? Like, how are we supposed to navigate what's the right thing? Anyone have any thoughts?
It's a balancing act, like so many things, right? And there are imperfections in people, there are imperfections in companies. Prioritizing, which is part of developing a personality for a company. Mm-hmm. I mean, in some ways, companies can be like humans, right? And you can be caught between two difficult options. And it goes back to also if you're doing something where it's not the ideal choice, but it's the choice you decided because of consideration of different factors, and it's how you do it, right? And I mean, over the years, I've had to help so many companies, especially during COVID, with layoffs. Those were 24-hour days, right? That was a very human moment. Probably maybe in 25 years, perhaps the most human lawyering that I've had to do. And there's a way to do that. It was necessary, and there was a way to do it. And most of my clients really did it right. And, that's what companies can do. They're going to have to face hard things, and they're going to have to do them the best they can. Not perfect.
Marcia.
Remind me of the question again?
What's that?
Remind me.
I don't even know. Was there a question?
What do you do when you're stuck with two hard choices?
Yeah. How do you do a right and wrong? How do you balance with
two things that I recommend companies do. Number one is, in the compliance world, you always talk about tone at the top, right? But you got to talk about the tone at the top, the mood in the middle, and the buzz at the bottom. Right? If you've got a fantastic mission statement and everybody's all super ethical at the top, but the frontline supervisor is a complete disaster and lies and cheats and steals, that's all that matters. And then the second thing is to let people know that it's okay to fail. Right? Because when people think they can't fail, then they'll never report when they've made a mistake, and they will cover it up. And if you have the kind of culture where if you fail, you're out, or you make a mistake, you're out, as opposed to a culture that says, right, what's the lesson from the failure? We caught it early, great, now let's fix it, let's remedy it, let's make sure it doesn't happen again. You can do that debrief. It's a very different kind of place. And so you cannot have a moral company if you have a company where people feel that if they fail, they will get fired. Now, if they fail repeatedly, they should be fired. Right? But if they feel like they can't get the support and the remediation, you will build a culture of shortcuts, workarounds, and people who will never tell you the truth until the Department of Justice comes in, and all of a sudden they're ready to talk for a deal.
And they don't set challenging goals.
Right. Exactly. And if you don't have, there's the concept of growth mindset, there's growth mindset for companies as well. And the companies that encourage people to feel free to make mistakes so you can learn and to, fail fast and that kind of stuff. It's a very different trajectory that people have, and it leads to mental health issues and those kinds of things. I think the last thing is that there's the American Bar Association and others. There's these 13 psychosocial safety factors in the workplace. Lots of countries and governments use them as well. Companies can look at those kinds of things as well and say, what can we do to make our workplace a place where it's safe for people, not just physically safe to walk in, but emotionally and psychologically safe to work in.
Can you tell us one or two of those 13 factors, or do you know off the top of your head?
I have a chart. I can send anybody a slide.
I'd like that. I mean,
Yeah, and the American Bar Association and Mental Health and the Canadian government, other governments use it. I literally have a slide. I can actually see the slide. There's things about balance, there's things about physical safety,
Right.
but there's other kinds of issues as well.
right. To me, like, I think this all kind of boils down to trust, right? I mean, isn't that like, employees want to trust their employers and we want to trust our vendors, and if we can't trust each other, then what do we have? And what I mean by that is that I think my people would trust me that I'm trying to do the right thing. I mean, I always do the right thing, but at least I'm trying. And I think like any other relationship, employment, employer, employee, employer, like Malin's looking at her watch, marketing director, partner, any relationship is built on trust, right? Any questions? I got one because I'm getting the eyeball raised. Yeah, a comment or a question,
It's a question.
please.
So for a potential employee or someone from a consumer standpoint looking to apply to jobs and looking at different companies to work at, how can they measure really? They have limited visibility into a company, right? I mean, other than the interview process. What are some ways that they can measure that companies do good, rate, or really come to learn how that company operates, right? Because at the interview level, everybody's putting their best face forward, right?
Don't rely on
Did everyone hear the question in the back? Did you guys all hear the question? All right. Well, I got a nose shake. So the question was how does an employee or a prospective employee get a true measure of the values of a company, other than just reading it on the website during the process, either interviewing or before you're employed by a company? How do you really know?
So you were saying interview. The interview is not a unilateral space, so that's why you have to bring your list of questions and ask. And I do remember one time when I was asking, like, okay, so currently in my job, I work from 9 to 6, then I have a couple of hours to go and put my baby to sleep and, and have dinner. And then if necessary, I can connect from home. How is it here? And the guy was very evident and say, hey, I don't think that works here because we're here always working until 9 or 10, so you will need to be here, so you will need to, so don't lose your opportunity in each and every interview you go through. And then I guess the other relevant piece is also try to connect with people that hasn't worked or is currently working with a company, and also try to have a frank conversation about all those things that are important to you, like whether it's, as you say, working schedule, culture, environment, or whether, as you say, Marcia was mentioning, does a company allow you to fail? Do they promote that? Yes or no? So all those things are important to you. There's mechanisms. Of course, many companies will have and put their nice little things on their website, but that's not enough. So I guess talking to a lot of people, or trying, and if not, try to have someone get you to talk to someone that works there, and it's not in the recruitment process, that can give you a frank and an object. That would be my...
And I hope that Alejandro's not interviewing, but I'm sure this is a question for a friend. I have this friend that's interviewing. But I think you can also, if you're reading on the website and you're on an interview, you can ask someone, hey, how is the company doing with its sustainability goals? I don't know what you're talking about. And so there's other ways to vet out whether or not, it's just lip service or something they put on the website. Any other parting thoughts?
The second part of that, as far as talking to people who are there, seeing how long people have been there, retention is probably the biggest tell. So those are my 2 contributions to that.
I want to say thank you to this incredible panel. Thank you so much.
For more information on this show and other resources, visit bastamron.com and connect with us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram @Bast Amron.